There is a hard truth Marcus Aurelius seems to have understood very early. Many people do not fall apart because they become bad, but because they keep trying to be good in a way that slowly makes them disappear. They mistake endurance for virtue, overgiving for love, and silence for maturity, until one day they realize what has been growing inside them is not peace, but exhaustion. In this video, you will see why kind people often do not break because they are hated, but because they are used. Why many relationships do not truly love your goodness, but only the comfort they get from it. And most importantly, what Marcus Aurelius is really warning us about. Not that you should stop being kind, but that you should stop betraying what is right inside you just to be accepted. If you have ever felt tired of always being the understanding one, the one who gives way first, the one who keeps everything from falling apart, this video will do more than explain what is happening. It will help you redefine what a truly mature good person is: kind, but not self-abandoning. There are seasons in life when you begin to feel unlike yourself. Not colder, exactly. Not more bitter, either. Just more tired of people. More likely to stay quiet in moments when you once would have tried to explain. More likely to pull inward after conversations that seemed completely normal on the surface. And maybe the most confusing part is that you cannot quite tell whether you are growing up or slowly losing some important part of yourself. Sometimes it begins in a very ordinary meeting. Someone presents an idea that you can already tell has problems in it. You see the gap. You know that if everyone goes along with it, sooner or later, things will get messier, not better. And still, you nod. Not because you agree, just because you are too tired to be the one who has to speak up. Too tired of that feeling when the whole room goes quiet and then turns toward you as if you are the one making things uncomfortable. So you stay quiet. You let it pass. A few minutes later, someone else keeps talking. The meeting moves on. Everyone seems fine. Everyone except you, because you know that in one very small way, you just betrayed something inside yourself. Your own honesty. Then there is family, where being the understanding one is usually not given to you as a gift. It is placed on your shoulders as a responsibility no one ever asked if you wanted. Maybe you are the one who always has to swallow one more sentence just to keep the house peaceful. The one who is expected to understand more because you're older now, or you're the mature one, or just let it go so things stay calm. Little by little, you become the person who knows how to step back, who knows how to swallow things down, who knows how to soften what you really feel so other people do not have to sit in discomfort. From the outside, people call that maturity. But on some very quiet nights, even you know that what is happening is not entirely maturity. Sometimes it is just a very old kind of loneliness, the loneliness of always having to be stronger than your real feelings. And in love, that exhaustion takes on a different shape. You become the one who is always explaining the other person to yourself. They go silent, and you come up with reasons for them. They become inconsistent, and you tell yourself they must be going through something. They pull away, and you remind yourself to be more patient, more compassionate, more understanding, just a little longer. There are texts that arrive too late, promises that do not hold, distances that keep growing, and still, you are the one trying to fill the space with patience. Not because you are weak, but because you genuinely wanted to keep it. And the cost of always being the one who understands everyone else is that sometimes, eventually, no one understands you anymore. Friendship can drain a person in quieter ways too. Some people only come when they are overwhelmed, when they are hurting, when they need somewhere to unload everything heavy inside them. You still answer, you still listen, you are still gentle, the way you always are. But when you are the one feeling low, when you are the one who needs a sincere check-in, everything goes strangely quiet. No one knocks on the door of your heart the way you knocked on theirs. And that is when you start to see a hard truth for what it is. Not everyone you treat with kindness truly knows the value of that kindness. Many people simply get used to your presence being there for free. A person like this is rarely exhausted because of one major event. It usually comes from dozens, even hundreds, of moments just like these. One reluctant nod, one silence to keep the peace, one more stretch of waiting after your heart is already tired, one more reply to someone who only remembers you when they need something. Taken one by one, none of these moments seem dramatic, but added together, they begin to empty you out. Not loudly, not theatrically, just slowly enough that one day you find yourself sitting alone and realizing that being a good person no longer feels light. It just feels tiring, heavy, overfull, as if you have lived too long inside a version of goodness where everyone gets to breathe easier, except you. And that is when a lot of people begin to get scared. They think maybe they are becoming worse, maybe more selfish, maybe less patient, less generous, less kind than they used to be. But maybe that is not the truth at all. Maybe you are not becoming a worse person. Maybe you are simply exhausted from living too long as the one who always understands, always yields, always absorbs, always smooths things over, always keeps things from falling apart. You are not becoming bad. You are just beginning to feel the cost of a kind of goodness that is no longer virtue at all, but slow erosion. The problem is not that you know how to care for others. The problem is that you may have cared for others so much that your own inner voice has gotten quieter and quieter over time. And when that goes on long enough, the soul does not break all at once. It wears down by degrees. It wears down every time you swallow your feelings. Every time you bend the truth to keep the peace. Every time you tell yourself to try a little harder, understand a little more, endure a little longer, until eventually you are no longer sure whether you are living with kindness or simply living in a way that keeps other people comfortable. Marcus Aurelius understood this world more deeply than most people realize. He did not write about character from a sheltered or peaceful life. He lived in the middle of power, betrayal, flattery, war, plague, and the very real decay of human behavior. He knew how petty people could become when fear, ambition, and ego took over. So when he warns us to guard the soul, it is not the naive advice of someone untouched by life. It is the warning of a man who had seen very clearly the ways the world can distort a human being. And maybe that is exactly why the warning feels so unsettling. What destroys a person is not only the evil that comes from outside, not only being used, misunderstood, betrayed, or treated unfairly. The deeper destruction happens when, in order to survive a world like this, we slowly get used to betraying the best part of ourselves. Not through one dramatic choice, but through choices that are small, reasonable, easy to excuse. Until one day, we cannot even tell when we drifted away from ourselves. And when that erosion does not come through open hatred, but through the quiet weight of other people leaning harder and harder on your kindness, that is when the real paradox begins to show. There is a sad paradox that many people only recognize after they have been tired for a very long time. Most of the time, good people are not hurt by life through direct attacks. It is not always someone standing in front of them and saying, "I'm going to use you. I'm going to drain you. I'm going to treat your kindness like it's automatic." Life is rarely that crude. It is subtler than that, quieter than that, more hidden than that. It happens inside ordinary situations, so ordinary that if you tried to explain them out loud, you might even struggle to call them hurt. And yet those ordinary moments are often exactly what wear a kind person down the fastest. At work, the most responsible person is almost always the one who gets handed more. Not because they have more free time, not because they are being rewarded more fairly. It is simply that everyone quietly knows this person is reliable. This person will not let things fall apart. This person probably will not say no. And so, again and again, the tasks that should have been shared somehow drift in their direction. A small favor, an extra assignment that is just for this once. A rushed deadline because you do it better. A project everyone avoids that somehow lands in the hands of the person already carrying too much. At first, they take it as trust. After a while, they begin to realize that the trust is not entirely pure. Sometimes it is just a very polite way of shifting the burden onto the person least likely to resist. It happens in families too. The person who causes the least trouble is rarely the one given the lightest load. Usually, they are the one expected to yield more. The hot-tempered one gets excused because that's just how they are. The fragile one gets protected because they're more sensitive. And the one who thinks carefully, carries themselves quietly, and knows when to stay composed, somehow becomes the one who is expected to understand everyone. Little by little, their calmness stops being treated like a virtue and starts being treated like a resource, something available, something usable, something that will not run out. They become the person expected to stop first, soften first, let it go first, because everyone assumes they can take it. And almost no one stops to ask the obvious truth. Being able to endure something does not mean it does not hurt. Among friends, it takes a different form. The person who listens best often becomes the emotional storage room for everyone else. People come to them after heartbreak, after failure, after family problems, after those nights when they do not know who else to call. They are trusted, confided in, treated like a safe place. But the paradox is this: the person who keeps becoming a safe place for others very often has no safe place of their own. When they are tired, people do not notice. When they go quiet, people assume they are fine. When they withdraw, no one understands that it may be the sign of someone who is already too full to speak. Some people spend so many years being the good listener that the world forgets they need to be listened to with that same sincerity too. And in love, this paradox can hurt even more. The most patient person is often the one whose limits get tested the most. Not because they deserve it, but because their patience creates a dangerous illusion in the other person's mind that they will still be there, that they will still understand, that they will still wait, that they can be hurt one more time and still not leave. And so the delays begin to repeat. Broken promises start getting absorbed. Inconsistency becomes something you quietly tell yourself will probably pass. The other person does not always sit down and consciously plan to exploit you. A lot of the time, they simply get used to the fact that your love has a higher tolerance than their sense of responsibility. And that is how a good heart wears down, not always through blunt rejection, but through being treated like something durable enough to keep testing without fear of losing it. That is what many kind people fail to see for a very long time. They think they are living beautifully, that they are being compassionate, that they are becoming more mature, more spacious, more understanding, and in some ways, they are. But sometimes, behind all that beauty, they are also teaching the world a quiet lesson every single day. Not with words, but through the way they keep responding. They are teaching people that they will always understand, even when the situation is no longer fair. They are teaching people that they will always wait, even when the effort is no longer mutual. They are teaching people that they will always overlook it, even when the wound keeps arriving in the same form. And most dangerously of all, they are teaching people that they will not leave so their limits can keep being pushed a little further, and then a little further, and then a little further again. This does not happen because they are foolish, and it does not happen because they were born to be used. Most of the time, it happens because they have a soft heart, a conscience that does not want to hurt anyone, and a habit of putting other people's comfort ahead of their own internal warning signs. But life does not always know how to distinguish kindness from a willingness to endure. Neither do people. The world has a very cold way of operating. The one who can carry more usually ends up being given more. Not because someone carefully calculated it all, often simply because human beings adapt very quickly to any place that does not resist. And that is why so many good people end up exhausted without understanding why. They look back and think, I did not do anything wrong. I was not cruel. I was not selfish. I was not careless. And they are right. What they have not yet seen is that there are ways of living that are not morally wrong and still slowly destroy you because they are missing something essential, the boundary of the soul. Not every act of giving is right. Not every act of enduring is noble. Not every act of staying is deep. If your kindness is always measured by how much you can absorb, sooner or later it turns into an unlocked door. Marcus Aurelius is strikingly clear about this. He does not teach people to become cold. He does not praise a hard, brittle kind of strength that costs us our capacity for compassion. But he returns again and again to something far more important. The mind must learn to distinguish between what is truly right and what is merely the habit of pleasing other people. That is a very thin line. But if you do not see it, you can spend your whole life believing you are living with virtue, when in truth, you are being guided by the fear of disappointing someone. Because sometimes you stay quiet, not out of peace, but out of fear of making things uncomfortable. Sometimes you help not out of justice, but out of guilt at the thought of refusing. Sometimes you wait not because your love is deep, but because you are afraid to face the possibility that they may never choose you. Sometimes you overlook things not out of generosity, but because you have become so used to being the one who absorbs instability just to keep everything going. On the surface, all of it looks like kindness, but Marcus Aurelius would force us to go deeper and ask, how much of this comes from character, and how much of it comes from dependence on being accepted? That is a hard question, because it does not make us feel noble, it makes us honest. It asks us to look again at the times we called exhaustion compassion, the times we called swallowing things down maturity, the times we called not daring to leave loyalty. And the more honestly we look, the more clearly we see something uncomfortable. A kind person without boundaries is very quickly interpreted by the world as a person who is always available to take more. The painful part is that this process rarely begins with obvious malice from other people. It usually begins with small moments where you stretch yourself a little just to make things easier for everyone else. Then a little more. Then a little more after that. Until kindness is no longer something radiant that rises from inner strength. It becomes a habit of dimming yourself so that other people can feel more comfortable. And from that point on, you are no longer seen as a human being with limits. You are seen as endurance. The problem was never that you were too good. The problem is that your goodness may have lost its shape, its edges, its point of stopping, that place where you say, from here on, this is no longer love. This is self-abandonment. And the paradox goes even deeper than that, because many people say they appreciate kindness, when what they really cherish is only the comfort your kindness gives them. After enough time moving through relationships, a painful truth begins to surface for a lot of people. Not everyone who praises your kindness actually values kindness as a virtue. Not everyone who says they appreciate who you are is really seeing who you are. A lot of the time, what they value is the feeling they get around you. The feeling of being listened to, being accommodated, being understood, being given the benefit of the doubt, being forgiven, being handled more gently than they have really earned. It sounds a little bitter when you first hear it, but if you have lived long enough in the role of being easy to be around, You know exactly what this means. Some people say they like you because you are sincere. They say being around you feels easy, real, safe, like they do not have to be guarded. But the moment you begin speaking a truth they do not want to hear, even if you say it calmly, respectfully, without cruelty, the atmosphere changes immediately. Suddenly, it is no longer called sincerity. Now it is called being difficult, negative, complicating things. And you stand there, a little stunned, because for the first time you realize that maybe what they appreciated was never the truth in you. Maybe they only appreciated the version of the truth that did not make them uncomfortable. Some people call you sweet, gentle, easygoing. And yes, sometimes those are beautiful things to be. But sometimes, if you are honest enough to look closely, those words simply mean this: you have never made things hard for them. You have never said no. You have never forced them to face your limits. You have never asked them to adjust the way they deal with you. So, of course, you feel easy to them. Not because you possess some extraordinary moral depth, but because you have not created any resistance to their convenience. You can see this very clearly at work. Everyone says they like colleagues who are cooperative, flexible, supportive, and of course they do. Who would not want to work with someone easy to work with? But watch what happens the day that person starts saying no to unreasonable requests. Watch what happens when they begin saying, "This needs to be done properly. Responsibility needs to be clear. This is not fair. This cannot keep being handled this way." Watch what happens when they stop smiling through the leftovers of other people's disorganization. Very quickly, the image changes. From easy to work with to difficult. From supportive to rigid. From team player to not flexible enough. And then you start to understand. Some environments do not really value good people. They value people who keep the system running smoothly by absorbing the strain with their own endurance. In families, this paradox can run even deeper because it gets tied to love, roles, and labels that may have existed for years. Some people grow up hearing, "You're such a good child." But what was called goodness was often just silence at the right moments, restraint in the right places, never making things harder for anyone else. They were loved for being sensible, praised for being mature, trusted because they always knew how to lower themselves just enough to keep the household calm. But then the day comes when they start having a position of their own. They disagree. They speak clearly about what does not feel right. And the first response they receive is usually not respect. It sounds more like this: "You've changed lately. You were never like this before. Why are you so difficult now?" And that kind of pain is very specific, because you begin to realize that what used to be called your goodness may not have been your character at all. It may simply have been the state of not disturbing other people's familiar balance. A lot of people take years to name this clearly. They think they were loved for who they are. But in many relationships, what was really being preserved was their ability to make life smoother for someone else. They were liked because they knew how to hold back, valued because they knew how to listen, needed because they knew how to give, called good because they did not force anyone to re-examine themselves. And all the while, they were telling themselves a beautiful story that this was love, connection, appreciation, mutual care, until the day they could no longer provide that comfort. That is when the truth shows itself very quickly. That is why some relationships do not break when you do something wrong. They break the moment you become clearer. You are not ruder, not more selfish, not more bitter. You have simply become more honest about your limits. And that honesty makes people uncomfortable because it removes a convenience they had gotten used to enjoying. When a relationship depends more on comfort than truth, it begins to shake the moment you stop cushioning someone else's emotions, delays, or irresponsibility. This is where many people get deeply hurt, because they confuse being loved with being used gently. The difference can look small on the outside, but at the level of truth, it is enormous. When someone truly values kindness as a virtue, they still respect you when you speak something difficult with sincerity. They still treat you with decency when you set a boundary. They still see your value even when you are no longer as convenient to them as you once were. But when someone only values the feeling of being treated well, their appreciation fades very quickly the moment you stop making them comfortable. And that is where the second paradox becomes clear. A lot of people do not love kindness as a virtue. They love the ease they receive from it. They do not really love sincerity. They love the version of sincerity that does not touch their defenses. They do not really love gentleness. They love the fact that your gentleness allows them to avoid the consequences of their own behavior. They do not really love a moral human being. They love the feeling of being handled lightly by one. So, the issue is not that you are kind. And it is not that kindness is wrong. The issue is this. The moment you stop serving their comfort, they will show you what they truly value. And very often, it is not you. It is the role you played in their life. The understanding one, the soft one, the one who steps back, the one who does not create waves, the one who keeps the bridge from collapsing, the one who absorbs the difficult part so that everything can continue to look fine. Marcus Aurelius keeps bringing us back to a question that sounds simple, but is incredibly hard to live by. What is the right thing to do, according to nature and reason? Not what makes other people more pleased with me. Not what helps me keep being seen as sweet, good, agreeable, cooperative, mature, but what is right, what is just, what is worthy of a soul that does not want to bend itself simply to purchase temporary peace in someone else's eyes. That is a major shift, because when you are still living to preserve the image of being a good person in the eyes of others, it becomes very easy to confuse approval with truth. Someone feels satisfied with you, and you take that as proof that you are living correctly. But Marcus Aurelius reminds us that other people's approval is not a moral compass. Sometimes you do the right thing, and people do not like it. Sometimes you are honest and people pull away. Sometimes you keep your dignity, and people say you have changed. That does not mean you are moving away from virtue. Sometimes it means you are finally getting closer to it. This is a deeply painful awakening for many people. Not because they were betrayed in some dramatic, cinematic way, but because they are forced to accept something subtler. They did not lose a relationship because they became worse. They lost it because they stopped playing the role of being easy. They were not left because they became more difficult in some moral sense. They were left because they no longer made the other person comfortable in the old way. And once they see that, many people feel both grief and relief. Grief, because the truth is not as beautiful as they once believed. Relief, because at last they understand. What left was not always real love. Sometimes it was just convenience, withdrawing because you were no longer willing to provide it. This paradox is cruel, but it is also liberating, because from here, you begin to stop trying to be loved by making yourself smaller. You begin to understand that if a relationship can only survive while you stay silent, soft, and endlessly accommodating, then what is being preserved may not be healthy connection at all. It may simply be an arrangement where one person gets to remain comfortable while the other is expected to keep adapting. And once you see that clearly, you can no longer define goodness in the old way. You stop treating other people's comfort around you as proof of your character. You begin to need a truer measure, a deeper one, something closer to the reality of life. If you want to see that clearly enough that you can no longer lie to yourself about it, all you have to do is look closely at one very ordinary day in the life of someone who is always trying to be kind. Because it is usually in the smallest moments that self-betrayal becomes the easiest to miss and the hardest to deny. Some kinds of exhaustion do not come from a major event, not from one obvious betrayal, not from one explosive argument, not from a loss so big you can point to it and say, "That is what changed me." Some forms of erosion happen inside a completely ordinary day. A day that looks unremarkable from the outside. You still go to work. You still answer messages. You still smile when needed. You still keep things looking fine. But if you look more closely, if you really live honestly inside that day, you begin to notice that little parts of you are being left behind along the way. The morning does not begin with anything dramatic. Your phone lights up. A message from someone who usually only appears when they need something. Maybe it is a friend who has not checked on you in a long time, but the moment they have a problem, they remember you immediately. Maybe it is someone who has let you down more than once, but every time they come back, they do it in that same familiar tone, as if there was never any distance between you. Maybe it is a favor, a complaint, an emergency, or some vague emotional weight that quietly demands your gentleness right away. You see what is happening. You are not naive. You know you are being pulled back into the role of the understanding one again. And still, you reply politely. You choose soft words. You act like it is fine, not because it truly feels fine inside, but because you are so used to not making people feel too clearly rejected. So the day begins with one very small act of self-erasure that almost no one notices, including you. By mid-morning, work starts moving fast. Something comes up. A gap opens in the project. Something needs to be handled, and technically, it is not your responsibility. But if you do not do it, someone will feel awkward. Someone will fall behind. The team will feel a little more strained. You know perfectly well that you have the right to say, "This is not mine to carry." You know that if you take it on, you will have to compress your own time even more, and by the end of the day, you will be tighter, more drained, more stretched. But you still nod. You still say the familiar sentence, "Yeah, I'll take a look." Some kind people say that sentence so often they stop hearing the cost attached to it. They only see the discomfort in front of them, someone else's pressure, someone else's stress, someone else's inconvenience. Their own overload keeps getting moved lower on the list. And strangely enough, the more they prove they can carry, the more they are given to carry. Not because anyone hates them, just because everyone slowly begins to believe they will handle it. At lunchtime, you sit with a group of people. On the surface, everything still feels normal. People are talking, joking, sharing the small details of everyday life. Then, someone makes a joke that lands a little too close to you. Or maybe it is about a kind of person very much like you. Or maybe it touches something in you that does not feel funny at all. It is not big enough to count as open disrespect. It is just slightly off, slightly sharp, just enough to make something inside you tighten for a second. But you still laugh, a small laugh, just enough to keep the moment moving. No one has to feel embarrassed. No one has to stop. The atmosphere stays easy. And the price of that ease is that once again, you place your real feeling underneath everyone else's comfort. It is the kind of moment so small that most people would never think it matters. But when you live through too many smiles that go against your truth, you slowly lose your sense of what it feels like to be honest with yourself. By the afternoon, the tiredness is no longer just in your body. It starts touching your mind. In a conversation, a meeting, or just some ordinary moment of life, you hear someone say something you do not agree with. Maybe it is unfair. Maybe it is sloppy, but being rationalized. Maybe it is something everyone knows is not right, but no one wants to be the one to say it. In your mind, the response is already clear. You know what you think. You know what needs to be said. But then you look around. You imagine people's expressions. You anticipate that feeling of being seen as negative, difficult, the one who is making things more complicated than they need to be. And once again, you choose silence. Not because you do not have a point of view, but because you have gotten used to measuring the truth inside you by how willing other people are to receive it. So every time this happens, you are not just missing a chance to speak honestly, you are teaching yourself that inner clarity can be postponed indefinitely, as long as the surface stays calm. By evening, your body may be sitting still, but your role as the person who absorbs other people's emotions is not done yet. Your phone rings again. A long call. On the other end is someone overwhelmed, sad, full, someone who needs another person to hold their feelings for a while. And you do what you always do. You listen. You speak gently. You keep your tone steady. You make room for them. You try to help carry the weight of what they are feeling, but the call keeps going. And at some point, you notice there is almost no question coming back toward you. No. How are you? No. Are you okay today? No. What has been heavy for you? No. Do you need to be heard too? The call ends. They feel lighter. And you put your phone down with a mind that feels heavy as stone, not because you do not care about them, but because once again, you used the last of your energy to become a container for someone else's pain, while your own inner life still had nowhere to go. Then night comes. Everything is quieter. No more messages, no more calls, no more role to perform. And it is there, in that very private silence, that you start to feel what you have been avoiding all day. You do not lie there thinking, I really am such a good person. Almost no one who truly lives like this feels proud in that way. What you feel is usually closer to emptiness, a low-grade ache, a sense that something in you is being worn down, but in a way that is hard to put into words. Not because anything huge happened today, but because nothing huge happened at all. And maybe that is exactly what makes it frightening. Because this is how what we call being a good person damages so many people, not through one dramatic collapse that teaches us to be careful, not through one violent event that forces us to recognize mistreatment immediately, but through hundreds of tiny compromises, reasonable, explainable, easy to overlook, that slowly pull a person further and further away from living in alignment with their own mind. One message answered when your heart did not want to answer. One extra task accepted when you were already overloaded. One smile that covered real discomfort. One silence instead of one clear sentence. One long call where you listened until you were empty and were never received in return. None of these moments seems large enough to condemn on its own, but together they form a way of living in which you keep stepping away from yourself just a little, so that everything around you can feel easier. Marcus Aurelius would look at this very directly. No one can steal your soul in some mystical way. No one simply walks in and takes your peace, your integrity, or your inward dignity unless you hand them over through small repeated choices every day. Not through one dramatic surrender, but through small nods, through swallowing things down, through repeatedly placing other people's comfort above your own truth, through calling self-abandonment kindness. Those choices may look small, but repeated long enough, they become the shape of the person you are becoming. That may be the hardest part to accept, because it takes away the simpler story that everything only got worse because of other people. Yes, there are careless people. Yes, there are unfair systems. Yes, there are one-sided relationships. But the deeper tragedy is not only there. The deeper tragedy is that we can become so used to leaving ourselves quietly that we stop hearing the sound of it. We no longer feel that we are betraying anything. We just tell ourselves we are keeping the peace, helping a little, letting it go, being understanding one more time. And because all of those things sound reasonable, We fail to notice that they are accumulating into a life that is drifting further and further from what is true inside. The tragedy is not that you gave too much in one obvious moment. Many people are awake enough to recognize those moments. The real tragedy is that you trained yourself to leave yourself so gently, so politely, so reasonably, that eventually you no longer noticed it. You still thought you were living beautifully, but deep down, some part of you began to thin out, began to grow quiet, began to stop wanting to speak, not because it had found peace, but because it had gone too long without being chosen. And when you begin to look at an ordinary day this way, you start to understand why so many people do not collapse all at once, but slowly become tired versions of themselves, more withdrawn, harder to reach, less connected, strangely unfamiliar to their own hearts. Not because they did something cruel, but because for too long they got used to doing what looked beautiful in a way that made them disappear by degrees. And if you look closely enough at those small compromises, you begin to see what Marcus Aurelius would have wanted us to understand very early on. Not every form of endurance is virtue. This is probably the point where many people start to feel the most uncomfortable, because it forces us to look again at the very things we once felt proud of in ourselves. Some people spend years believing they are the kind of person who knows how to endure, how to think of others, how to keep the peace, how to put the bigger picture first. And sometimes, yes, those really are signs of character. But Marcus Aurelius would not be so quick to praise every form of kindness the way we often do. He would not rush to call every silence wisdom. He would not rush to call every act of holding back maturity. He would not rush to call every act of giving something noble. He would slow down. He would look deeper. And he would ask harder questions. Is this silence coming from wisdom or from fear? Is this patience coming from inner strength or from the need to be liked? Is this help coming from justice or from guilt? Is this endurance coming from character or from the fear of losing someone? Those questions do not make us feel better about ourselves. They do not flatter the ego. They strip away the thin layer of paint we often put over our behavior, so we do not have to face the real motive underneath. And the longer you live, the more life rubs against you. The more you begin to understand that two actions can look exactly the same on the outside and come from two completely different places inside. A silent person may be deeply grounded, but they may also be deeply afraid. A forgiving person may be truly free, but they may also be desperately trying to keep a relationship from breaking. A helpful person may be acting from justice, but they may also be haunted by the fear that if they refuse, they will become the bad one. Take a simple example. Sometimes someone treats you with a quiet kind of disrespect, not blatant enough to make a scene, but enough that something inside you tightens. A dismissive comment, a cold tone, a repeated carelessness, and you say nothing. You tell yourself it is better to let it go. You do not want to be petty. You do not want to make something small into something big. You want to keep your peace. And on the surface, that can look mature. But if you are honest for even a moment, sometimes what sits underneath that silence is not peace at all. It is fear of conflict. Fear of being seen as too sensitive. Fear of making the atmosphere tense. Fear that the other person will look at you differently. If that is what is underneath, Marcus Aurelius would not call that virtue. He would see a mind being governed by other people's reactions. Or think about the times you keep helping someone over and over, even though you already know they are irresponsible. They forget things, repeat the same chaos, push consequences onto other people, and then expect understanding. And still, you step in. You clean it up. You carry it. You fix it. You rescue it. You tell yourself that you are being generous, that you care, that you cannot stand seeing someone struggle alone. But if you look more honestly, maybe what is leading you is not justice at all. Maybe it is guilt. Maybe it is the fear of being seen as selfish. Maybe it is your own discomfort with being the person who says no, which means you are not fully free in your helping. You are being pushed by the image you want to keep of yourself. Then there are the times you forgive too quickly. So quickly that you have not even touched the real wound inside you yet. Someone hurts you, then comes back with a vague apology, or sometimes not even an apology clear enough to deserve the word. And still, you soften right away. You tell yourself, it's okay. Everyone has moments like that. You rush back into the old rhythm, not because the hurt has actually been processed, but because you are afraid that if you hold your ground, if you do not come down first, if you leave the truth standing where it is, the relationship might break. And so you call that rush to smooth things over maturity, when in truth it may simply be fear. Fear of losing a connection you do not yet have the courage to look at honestly. This is the kind of thing Marcus Aurelius would never let us move past too quickly. He would not care much about how beautiful your behavior looks on the surface. He would care about what is governing your mind beneath it. Because in Stoicism, virtue is not found in looking gentle or sacrificial. Virtue is found in whether an action comes from clear reason, upright character, and inner self-command. If an act of kindness comes from fear, emotional dependence, or the need to be accepted, then no matter how soft it looks, Stoicism would not call it virtue. And this is the part many people were never clearly taught. They were taught to endure, to understand, to be forgiving, to stay soft, to think of others. But almost no one taught them that some forms of endurance bend the soul out of shape. Some forms of being understanding become self-betrayal. Some forms of compassion are really just fear of abandonment. Some forms of helping make people so attached to the role of rescuer that they can no longer tell the difference between kindness and dependence. Stoicism looks at this very directly. It does not condemn kindness, but it is not naive about disguised motives either. It knows that a person can do something that looks beautiful while acting from a place that is deeply unfree inside. You can be gentle in the way of someone with real inner strength, but you can also be gentle in the way of someone who cannot bear disappointing anyone. You can endure in the way of someone wise, but you can also endure in the way of someone who has become used to treating their own feelings as the thing that always comes last. On the outside, those two lives can look almost identical. Inside, they are worlds apart. So Marcus Aurelius would not warn you against being kind. He would warn you not to assume that everything kind in you is pure just because it makes other people comfortable. He would ask you to examine the source of your behavior, because sometimes what you call calm is really numbness. Sometimes what you call generosity is really self-erasure. Sometimes what you call love is really fear of loneliness. Sometimes what you call virtue is only another form of dependence. This is where many people begin to wake up, and also where it hurts the most. Because it turns out the greatest danger is not becoming a bad person. Most people like this are not afraid of becoming cruel. They are afraid of hurting others, letting people down, creating tension, becoming selfish. But that is exactly why they rarely stop to ask whether they are living truthfully with themselves. They only check whether other people still find them pleasant, and that is a very deep trap. You can go very far in preserving the image of being a good person, while day by day living further and further away from what is true inside you. The frightening thing is not that one day you suddenly become cruel. The frightening thing is that you can go on believing you are good while quietly drifting farther from what is right, farther from inner honesty, farther from the dignity of someone who dares to feel, dares to speak, dares to set limits, dares to let other people be displeased when that is what it takes to keep the soul from bending out of shape. On the surface, you still look kind, but inside, more and more parts of you are being pressed down, bent away, and silenced all. So the role of the good person can continue. And once you see that clearly, you stop asking the simple question, am I good or not? You have to ask a truer question, a harder one, but also the one that may actually save you. Is what I am doing right? Or is it only helping me remain loved? Once you begin to tell the difference between real virtue and disguised people-pleasing, you start to see that the world does not only push against goodness, it keeps testing whether your goodness has any shape to it. When people have been tired for too long from always giving, it is very easy to come to a conclusion that feels both quick and bitter. This world hates good people. But if you look more carefully, the truth may not be exactly that. The world does not always come straight at your kindness like an open enemy. It is much subtler. It does not always destroy you through obvious cruelty. A lot of the time, it simply tests the shape of your goodness. Does it have a backbone? Does it have boundaries? Can it stand on its own? Or is it just something soft that keeps reshaping itself to fit whatever other people need? That is a huge difference. Because if you keep telling yourself that the problem is simply that the world punishes good people, you will usually fall into one of two extremes. Either you stay so soft that people keep using you, or you harden, go cold, and start believing that if you lose enough feeling, you will finally be safe. But Marcus Aurelius would not lead you into either of those directions. He does not tell you to become sharp or emotionally frozen. He simply forces you to look more clearly. The real question is not whether you are kind. The real question is whether that kindness is being guided by virtue or being pulled around by the need to be accepted. And the world tests that almost every day. It tests whether you know how to say no. A message comes in from your boss just as you are about to log off. Something extra after hours. The familiar line, just this once. And as soon as you read it, you already know it is not really just this once. You know that if you accept it, people will get used to it. You know that if this keeps happening, the line between responsibility and quiet exploitation will blur a little more. But then another part of you reacts right away. Come on, just push through a bit. It feels awkward to say no this late. What if they really need help? What will they think if I refuse? And suddenly the real test is no longer about work. The real test is whether your kindness has enough shape to say, not today. It tests whether you need recognition. Some people are only kind when that kindness is seen, appreciated, thanked, admired. But there are also moments when you do the right thing and no one notices. No one thanks you. Sometimes people even treat it like it was simply expected. And that is when a lot of people start to wobble. Not because the right thing has suddenly become wrong, but because they discover that somewhere inside, they were quietly hoping for some kind of emotional reward. A word of acknowledgement, a look of understanding, some sign that it mattered. There is nothing wrong with wanting to be seen, but if your kindness can only stand when someone else recognizes it, then it is still depending quite a lot on outside approval. It tests whether you are afraid of being misunderstood. An ex comes back with a vague message. No clear apology, no clear intention, just enough to stir the soft place in you that used to hurt. You know this kind of vagueness. You know what it feels like to get pulled back into the role of the one who understands, the one who gives one more chance, the one who translates what other people never say clearly. But then, another fear appears. If I stay silent, will they think I am bitter? If I answer briefly, will I seem cold? And that is where the real test is. Not whether you still love them, but whether you are willing to be misunderstood a little in order to protect your own inner clarity. It tests whether you are willing to walk away when you are being quietly disrespected. This one hurts, because not everyone insults you with harsh words. Some forms of disrespect come through attitude, through repeated indifference, through the fact that someone only remembers you when they need something, but has never truly valued your presence. A friend only calls when they are in crisis. They unload everything, complain, pour it all out, then disappear as soon as they are feeling better. Next time, the same pattern returns. And still, you care. You still listen. You still help. Because you understand that everyone has weak moments. But the hidden test here is this. Do you see that you are being placed into a role of convenience? And if you do see it, do you respect yourself enough to step back? Or do you stay simply because you cannot bear disappointing someone? It also tests whether you can still be good when no one is watching. This is a very quiet place, and very few people are fully honest with themselves about it. We like to think we are kind entirely because it is right, but sometimes we also like the feeling of being the kind one, the generous one, the dependable one, the good person in someone else's story. And when no one sees that anymore, when no one confirms it, we can become more unsettled than we expect. Marcus Aurelius would bring us back to something very cold, but very clean. If something is right, then it is still right, even when no one applauds you for it. And if you can only do it when it is recognized, then maybe you are still living more from image than from principle. The world also tests your kindness through the old roles people want to pull you back into. A family member says, "You've always been the understanding one." On the surface, the sentence sounds gentle, almost impossible to argue with. But often there is a whole role hidden inside it. Go back to being the one who gives way first. Go back to being the one who absorbs everyone's feelings. Go back to being the one who does not make things harder. And suddenly, your kindness is being tested not through hostility, but through love and familiarity, which is much harder, because now you are not just facing a present demand. You are facing an old identity that other people have grown used to benefiting from. When you change, they do not just feel inconvenience, they feel a familiar order being disturbed. So, at this point, the question is no longer, are you a good person? The real question is your kindness being guided by virtue or pulled by the need to be accepted? Are you helping because it is just, or because you cannot bear being seen as selfish? Are you staying because it is right, or because you are afraid people will think you are disloyal? Are you staying silent because nothing needs to be said, or because you are afraid of being misunderstood? Are you giving one more chance because the other person is truly changing, or because you cannot bear being the one who closes the door? This is where Marcus Aurelius becomes deeply practical. He does not build a soft morality where yielding is always right, enduring is always noble, and softness is always depth. He builds an inner life with order, a mind that knows what belongs to it and what does not. A mind that knows when to help and when to stop. A mind that knows when kindness is still virtue, and when it has started turning into a tool that allows other people to pass through you without carrying their own share. A steady soul does not need to stop being kind. It does not need to become bitter just to prove it has learned something. It does not need to build walls against the entire world. The only thing it stops doing is allowing its kindness to be used like an unlocked door. It still stays open, but it knows with whom. It stays soft, but it has edges. It still cares, but it no longer lets that care become the easiest path for other people to walk into and leave all their weight behind. When kindness has shape, it does not lose its beauty. It simply stops erasing itself in exchange for other people's comfort. And maybe that is the most mature form of goodness there is. Not turning cold toward the world, but no longer living as if your purpose is to always be easy to pass through. And even when kindness has finally found its shape, there is still one painful truth that every mature person eventually has to face. Not everyone will be saved by the love you give them. This may be the truth that hurts kind people the most. Not because it is cruel in some loud, dramatic way, not because it arrives through a betrayal that is easy to name, but because it comes slowly, honestly, and breaks apart a belief many people have carried for years. That belief is this: if I am sincere enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, steady enough, then eventually my love will reach the good in them. If I do not give up, do not turn away, do not harden, then something will change. But maturity often arrives with a very particular kind of pain. There are people you can love in the right way, and the outcome still does not change. You stay patient with someone who is always destroying themselves. You do not force them. You do not lecture them. You do not insult them. You stay there, reminding them to eat, to rest, to get help, to stop, to look at what they are doing, to step back from the things that are slowly tearing them apart. You stay when they are tired. You steady them when they fall. You believe that if someone remains beside them with enough consistency, they will eventually want to become gentler with themselves too. But month after month, year after year, they keep returning to the same old loops. They keep choosing what hurts them. They keep avoiding the truth. They keep postponing the work of saving themselves. And what exhausts you is not only watching them suffer. What breaks you is realizing that your patience does not have the power you hoped it had. There are people you love cleanly, honestly. No games, no power struggles, no using silence as punishment, no creating chaos just to keep them close. You come to them with clarity, consistency, and a kind of love that is calm but real. But they do not know how to trust that kind of love. They are used to things that feel tense, unclear, on and off, hot and cold. Your steadiness does not make them feel safe. It makes them feel unfamiliar, sometimes even bored, sometimes suspicious, because there are people shaped by so much hurt that they read peace as lack of depth, gentleness as weakness, and kindness as something easy to lose. And there you are not wrong, not lacking, not fake, and still unable to make the beauty in you be recognized for what it truly is. It happens in families too. Maybe you are the one who tried for years to keep the peace. You held back at the right times, spoke gently where you could, stepped back when needed. You thought that if you were calm enough, understanding enough, mature enough, the old patterns in the family would eventually soften. But year after year, the same roles keep getting handed back to the same people. The angry one stays angry. The controlling one stays controlling. The one who always shifts blame keeps shifting blame. And the understanding one is still called right back into the same position. At that point, what hurts is no longer just the unfairness of it. It is the feeling that you have been trying to preserve something that could never have changed through your goodwill alone. And then there are people you gave many chances to. You did not cut them off at the first mistake. You did not judge them at the first failure. You believed people need room to grow, and you wanted to be part of that generosity. But then they used those chances to delay their own growth. Each time you softened, they did not learn a lesson about love. They learned that they did not have to change yet. There would still be one more chance. And eventually, what hurts is not only that they do not change. What hurts is that you begin doubting your own kindness. You no longer know whether you are loving them or helping them postpone becoming accountable for themselves. This is where kind people often break the deepest. Not because they are hated, not because they are openly attacked, but because they discover a truth that is incredibly hard to swallow. You can love in the right way, and the result may still not change. You can come with all the sincerity in the world and still not reach the will of someone who does not want to wake up. You can stay, speak rightly, act rightly, endure rightly, and still watch them return to the very pattern that has been destroying them all along. For many people, this is the moment that breaks something deeper than hope. It breaks the illusion that love, if large enough, has the power to rescue, that the right kind of presence can carry a person across a threshold they will not cross themselves, that if you do not abandon them, they will not abandon themselves. But life does not always work that way. And Marcus Aurelius, with a realism that is severe but honest, brings us back down to the ground. He would remind us that you are responsible for your choices, only yours. You are responsible for whether you live uprightly, whether you speak truthfully, whether you act justly, whether you allow bitterness to distort you. But you do not own another person's will. You do not control the pace of their awakening. You cannot do the inward work that only they can do for themselves, and you cannot live their awakening for them. This is very hard to accept when you love deeply, because love often makes us want to carry with them, fix with them, pull with them, save with them. It makes us believe that if we understand enough, love enough, endure enough, eventually they will return to themselves. But Marcus Aurelius would not let us live forever inside that dream. He would force us to see the limits of moral influence. You can be an influence. You can be a presence. You can be an example, but you are not the owner of another person's soul. You cannot make someone choose what is right simply because you loved them rightly. And this is exactly where mature kindness begins to separate itself from immature kindness. Immature kindness often carries a secret dream inside it. I will save them. It may never say those words out loud, but it lives in how long we stay, how much we give, how much we explain, how long we hope. It lives in the belief that as long as I have not walked away, the story is not over yet. That, if I am good enough, the ending will still change. Mature kindness is more painful, but more honest. It does not say, I will save them. It says, I will not add more darkness to their life, but I will not drown beside them either. I will not retaliate. I will not become cruel. I will not push them further down just because they have not yet learned how to stand. But I will also stop calling endless participation in a destructive cycle love. I will not use my own self-destruction as proof of how deep my heart is. That is not coldness. That is truth with boundaries. That is compassion with wisdom. It is a kind of love that is no longer measured by how much you can endure, but by how much light you are still able to keep inside yourself while standing in front of someone else's darkness. Because if every time you help someone, you lose more peace, more clarity, more dignity, then eventually you are not saving anyone at all. You are simply allowing two people to sink instead of one. And life is full of people carrying moral guilt because they could not save the ones they loved, when what they really needed to learn was not how to try harder, but how to accept that some journeys can only begin from inside the other person. You can open the door, but you cannot walk through it for them. You can call out to them, but you cannot wake up for them. You can love them, but you cannot live for them. And painful as it is, that truth does not make your kindness meaningless. It only makes your kindness more mature. It takes away the illusion of rescue and gives you back something steadier, responsibility in the right place. You do not need to become anyone's savior. You only need to become the person who does not betray what is right while standing beside someone else's pain. Maybe that is one of the hardest lessons Marcus Aurelius has to offer. Not learning how to stop caring, but learning how to care without turning yourself into fuel for an inner war that the other person is still refusing to enter. And only when you accept that you are not here to save everyone, do you become ready to ask a more important question. What does a truly good person actually look like? After everything we have just walked through, maybe the most important thing is not learning how to protect yourself from the world. Maybe it is learning how to redefine what a good person really is. Because a lot of people are tired, not only because they gave too much, they are tired because from the beginning, they were carrying the wrong definition. They thought a good person is someone who is always pleasant, always available, always quick to forgive, always willing to give one more chance, always ready to sacrifice themselves to keep the peace, always the one who steps down first so that nothing falls apart. And because of that, they spent years trying to live beautifully in a way that slowly made them disappear. But Marcus Aurelius would not call that goodness in the deepest sense. He does not see morality as a performance of softness. He sees it as the uprightness of the soul. To him, a good person is not someone who keeps everyone around them comfortable. A good person is someone who does not betray what is right just to gain peace, approval, or a beautiful image in the eyes of others. That changes everything. A good person is not someone who is always pleasant. There are times when what is right will make other people uncomfortable. There are times when truth does not come wrapped in ease. There are times when justice requires you to say something another person does not want to hear. If you only dare to do what is right when it creates no inconvenience for anyone, that is not necessarily virtue. It may simply be a softened version of morality, shaped to fit the need to be liked. A good person is also not someone who is always accessible. Not everyone should have the same access to your time, your listening, your patience, and your openness. Some people come with goodwill. Some come with need. Some come with chaos. Some come only to keep taking from you something they do not want to learn how to build in themselves. If you open yourself to everyone in the same way, that is not generosity. Sometimes it is simply a lack of discernment. A good person is not someone who always forgives immediately. If forgiveness comes at all, it has to come with truth, awareness, boundaries, and a clear understanding of what actually happened and what it touched inside you. Forgiving too quickly is not always maturity. Sometimes it is a sign that you cannot bear the tension between yourself and another person, so you rush to stitch things back together before you have really looked at the wound. Marcus Aurelius would not teach you to hold on to resentment forever, but he would not tell you to act as though the wound was not real, just to preserve the image of yourself as generous. A good person is also not someone who always gives one more chance. A chance only means something if the other person has a real desire to change. Otherwise, many chances are simply rewards for delay. It is not always deeper to soften more. It is not always more loving to stay longer. Sometimes the right thing is not to continue. Sometimes the right thing is to stop without turning cruel, to close something without revenge, to walk away without needing to turn the other person into a monster just to justify your leaving. And certainly, a good person is not someone who always sacrifices themselves to keep the peace. If peace is maintained by one person constantly swallowing their truth, bending themselves, shrinking their real feelings, then that is not peace anymore. It is order maintained through the slow wearing down of one human being. Marcus Aurelius would not honor that kind of calm. He is concerned with real harmony, and real harmony cannot be built on a soul that must keep betraying itself. So what is a good person in the mature sense? It is someone who sees clearly, someone who does not lie to themselves by dressing reality up in beautiful names, someone who does not call fear compassion, someone who does not call dependence devotion, someone who does not keep saying, maybe they're just going through something, when what is really happening is repeated disrespect. They see things as they are, even when the truth makes them sad. This is deeply Marcus Aurelius. Before asking what should I do, first see clearly what is actually happening. It is someone who keeps their mind from being distorted by bitterness. This matters because after enough hurt, people often swing to the opposite extreme, from too soft to too hard, from too trusting to suspicious of everyone, from giving too much to shutting the door completely. But a mature good person does not let pain deform their character. They learn the lesson without losing the quality. They do not let disappointment become an excuse for cruelty. They keep an inner cleanliness, even if they are no longer naive. It is someone who acts justly. They do not favor the people they love so much that they start calling wrong things right. They do not demand fairness for themselves while making excuses for the irresponsibility of others. Justice means naming what is right as right and what is wrong as wrong, without coating it in extra bitterness. Some people are very gentle, but not just. They soften everything so much that eventually they blur the moral line itself. Marcus Aurelius would not call that complete virtue, because goodness cannot be separated from justice. It is someone who does not return evil for evil. This is one of the hardest things, and also one of the most beautiful. You can leave without humiliating someone. You can end a disrespectful relationship without launching a campaign to stain their name just to feel lighter yourself. You can say no without becoming sharp and poisonous. You can see the truth of another person without turning that truth into punishment. And this is not only for their sake, it is because you do not want to allow their darkness to decide the shape of your mind. It is someone who does not cooperate with what is wrong just to keep life smooth. This may be one of the clearest signs of mature goodness. You do not laugh along with something false just to avoid discomfort. You do not support a wrong way of doing things simply because it is convenient. You do not stay silent forever in the face of something clearly off, just to preserve the image of being easy to work with. This does not mean you always need to confront. It does not mean you always have to speak loudly. But inwardly, you do not collaborate. You do not sell the upright part of yourself in exchange for surface-level harmony. It is someone who knows how to stay soft without becoming shapeless, firm without becoming cruel. This is a very difficult state because it requires inner strength, not just communication skills. You can refuse an unreasonable request without anger. You can say, "I can't do that today," without over-explaining or feeling guilty for having limits. You can help a family member within the part that is truly yours to give, without letting them treat your sacrifice like it is automatic. You can say something difficult at work without humiliating anyone, because your goal is not to defeat them, but to keep what is true from disappearing under silence. That is the image of a mature, good person. Not weak, not bitter, not trying to please everyone, and not using pain as an excuse to become numb. You can see this very clearly in ordinary life. A boss asks for something unreasonable after hours, and you refuse in a calm voice. Not angry, not rude, not sarcastic, just clear. That is goodness, because you do not injure anyone, but you also do not betray the truth that you have limits. Maybe you end a relationship that has disrespected you for too long. You do not smear them. You do not recruit people to your side. You simply stop. That is goodness too, because you do not return wrong with wrong, but you also do not allow what is wrong to keep living in your life. Maybe at work, you say the hard thing everyone is avoiding, but you say it to correct the problem, not to humiliate anyone. That is goodness, because you choose truth without using truth like a weapon. Maybe you help a family member because it is right, but you do not let them assume your life exists to keep repairing the consequences they repeatedly create. That is goodness too, because there is still love there, but you no longer confuse love with endless self-sacrifice. When you begin to see it this way, you realize that morality is not measured by how gentle you appear. It is measured by how straight you are able to keep your soul. A good person is not someone who makes everyone feel comfortable around them. A good person is someone who, in whatever situation they are in, keeps trying to live in a way that does not require turning their back on what is right just to gain temporary peace. And that is what makes this part more hopeful than everything that came before. Because after enough pain, you do not have to choose between two extremes. Either remain so soft that people keep using you, or become so cold that no one can reach you anymore. Marcus Aurelius offers a third path. You can still be kind, still compassionate, still gentle. But none of those things is now your way of asking to be loved. They become your way of living rightly. This is mature goodness, not being kind in order to be loved. Not being kind in order to keep people from leaving. Not being kind in order to be seen as sweet, obedient, understanding, but being kind because it is the right way to live, even when it does not make you easy to understand. Even when it disappoints some people. Even when it causes relationships that only survived on your softness to begin to crack. And if a certain kind of kindness can only survive while you keep shrinking, yielding, and softening past what is true, then maybe that version of kindness is not what needs to be protected. What needs to be protected is the part inside you that still knows what is right and still has enough courage not to betray it. And only when you stop trying to be a good person in the version that keeps everyone comfortable do you become capable of reaching a much more honest conclusion about how to go on living in this world. After all of this, maybe the most mature thing is not promising yourself that tomorrow you will finally live better, cleaner, more perfectly. And maybe it is not standing in front of a mirror and deciding that from now on you will be harder, colder, less reachable, so no one gets another chance to wear you down. Promises like that sound strong when you have just been hurt, but they rarely heal anything at the root. Because the real issue was never only what other people did to you. The deeper issue is how you have learned to live with yourself inside all the small moments. So maybe what you need is not a louder version of yourself. Maybe what you need is a more honest way of looking back. To look back and ask when you were truly being kind. When you helped because it was right, because your heart was clear, because the moment genuinely called for it, because you were still free inside that choice. And then to look at the moments when you were only afraid of disappointing someone. The moments when you were gentle not because you were at peace, but because you could not bear the feeling of someone being upset with you. The moments when you were helping in the right way, and the moments when you were only prolonging something that had stopped being healthy a long time ago because you could not stand being the one to end it. The moments when you were living from character, and the moments when you were calling self-betrayal virtue just so you would not have to face the truth. That kind of awakening is not glamorous. There is no triumphant soundtrack behind it. There is no dramatic feeling that you have suddenly become a completely new person. It is much quieter than that. It feels more like beginning to recognize yourself in very small moments. Oh, this is me being soft because I love. And this is me being soft because I am afraid of being left. This is me being understanding from inner strength. And this is me swallowing something down because I have become used to treating my own feelings like they can always wait. And once you begin to see that, you do not have to change everything all at once. You do not need to suddenly become someone who says no to everything. You do not need to slam the door on the whole world. You do not need to turn your awakening into some dramatic reinvention. Sometimes what matters more is simply this. From now on, whenever you are standing in front of a choice, you pause a little longer and ask yourself, is what I am about to do actually right? Or is it only helping me continue to be seen as a pleasant person? Marcus Aurelius does not ask you to conquer the world. He does not ask you to become perfect in a life full of flattery, misunderstanding, selfishness, unfairness, and disorder. And he does not promise that if you live rightly, people will treat you rightly in return. He asks something much harder and much more honest. Do not let the world distort your soul. Do not let the fear of being disliked make you call silence wisdom. Do not let the need to be kept make you call self-erasure love. Do not let the habit of enduring make you forget what it feels like to live uprightly from within. Maybe that is the most honest conclusion a person who has been drained can carry with them. You do not need to be a saint. You do not need to save everyone. You do not need to always stay soft. You do not need to always understand. You do not need to always give one more chance. You only need to learn how not to abandon yourself whenever the world becomes difficult to live in. You only need to remember that kindness does not mean allowing other people to step over your boundaries while you still smile and welcome them in. Kindness also does not mean continuing to play the role of the strong one when something inside you has already been breaking for a very long time. The beautiful thing about Stoicism is not that it teaches people to go numb. It teaches people how to stand upright without turning hard. It teaches you how to keep your light without letting it be exploited. How to keep compassion without turning it into an open road for other people to dump the parts of themselves they still refuse to grow. It teaches you that character is not measured by how much you can endure, but by how much of what is right you are still able to keep when everything around you is inviting you to bend a little, just to make life easier. And if there is one thing truly worth carrying with you after this video, maybe it is this. You are not becoming worse when you begin to have boundaries. You are not selfish when you stop playing the savior. You are not cold when you refuse something unreasonable. You are not less good because you are no longer willing to be the easy version of yourself just so other people can stay comfortable. In fact, that may be the moment you begin returning to yourself more honestly than you have in years. Because being a good person was never meant to mean losing yourself quietly. In the spirit of Marcus Aurelius, goodness is not weakness, not endless accommodation, and not silent self-betrayal. It is the discipline of remaining just, clear, and inwardly free in a world that often rewards performance more than character. And if you can hold on to that, then whether other people understand or not, stay or not, appreciate it or not, you still keep the one thing that matters most. You still keep yourself.